So, welcome to today's debate on the motion, cars are still the future of mobility in the greater Golden Horseshoe. We lost him, Murtaza. He'll be back. Okay, so as I think we all know, mobility is one of the defining challenges of our region. With a growing population, expanding suburbs, and evolving technologies, how we move and how we should move is a pressing question for planners, policymakers, and all of us as residents. Today's debate will help us explore this issue from multiple angles, considering both the realities of our current transportation systems and the possibilities for the future. We are fortunate to have two distinguished experts with us today, each bringing deep knowledge of mobility, infrastructure, and urban development. Murtaza Haider is a professor of data science and real estate management and the associate dean of graduate programs at Toronto Metropolitan University. As the research director of the Urban Analytics Institute, he focuses on transportation, housing markets, and infrastructure planning. He's also the author of Getting Started with Data Science, it's a book, and has taught millions of students globally through his online courses with IBM. Today, he will be arguing in favor of the motion that cars are still the future of mobility in the greater Golden Horseshoe. Is this when I'm supposed to tell an embarrassing story about you, or no? Nothing
Everybody
embarrassing.
probably already have heard it.
Okay, so we'll save it for the cocktail hour. So Shoshana Sachs is a professor in civil and mineral engineering at the University of Toronto and the Canada Research Chair in Sustainable Infrastructure. She is also the director of the Centre for the Sustainable Built Environment and serves on multiple advisory panels shaping infrastructure policy and design. Her research asks a fundamental question: how should we literally build the future? She lives in Toronto with her 2 children and 0 cars. Today, she will be arguing against the motion that cars are not the future of mobility in the GGH. So before we begin, it's important to emphasize that this debate is a rhetorical exercise. Our goal is not to declare a final, absolute truth, but to sharpen our understanding of a very complex issue. The debaters will be making arguments in favor of their assigned positions on the motion, but these do not necessarily mean that these are their personal views or their only views on the matter. Real-world problems, especially those as nuanced as mobility and urban planning, rarely fit neatly into 2 opposing sides. However, by engaging in structured debate, we can better understand the trade-offs, challenges, and assumptions that shape all of our thinking on these complex topics. So the debate will begin with opening statements where each debater will have 2 minutes to make their case. Then we'll move into rebuttals, giving each speaker a chance to directly respond to their opponent's arguments. And after that, I'll ask both debaters a series of questions to push the discussion further. And then we'll open the floor up to the audience for Q&A. Just a reminder, when we do get to the audience Q&A, please keep your questions brief and make sure that they are truly questions rather than extended comments, as passions may get heated, but we need to keep things moving. So throughout the debate, we encourage you to keep an open mind, to capture how your views might be evolving in response to what you're hearing today. And we'll also be using a Mentimeter poll for voting. And the voting will work, there'll be 2 rounds of voting, so you'll vote now once before the debate begins, and again at the end. And the winner won't be determined by who gets the most votes overall, but by who gains the most votes as a difference from their vote before the debate and the vote after the debate. Okay? So why don't you guys please, you can enter your initial debate on the motion. Cars are still the future of the GGH. It's a yes/no question, but we're leaving room for undecided. And we'll give you a minute to grab the QR code. If feel like we should have done the Jeopardy music right now. But. The stipend would have been worth more if you told me you were going to sing, actually. Yeah.
Is there a stipend?
No. But if you were singing,
it would have been worth less.
Would have been worth infinitely more than this. Okay.
I work with incentives.
Is anyone having a problem reaching the vote? Okay, so let's have a look and see where the vote stands before the debate.
Can't see anything.
Okay, very mixed. So for the motion, cars are still the future of mobility, 23 votes. Against the motion, 27 votes. And 6 are undecided. Okay, and we'll leave this open because I can still see a few people. Are you texting over there, or are you casting your vote?
Oh, he's not looking.
Oh, okay.
So
Votes
busted.
Okay. Sorry to pick on you. It's kind of what I do. Okay. So with that, let's begin. Each debater will now have 2 minutes, and we have a little bit of time, so I'm not going to yell at you at 2 minutes, but I'll give you a nod that we're at 2. Okay. So we're going to start with Professor Hyder, who's arguing for the motion.
Thank you. Great to be here. Never in the past 30 plus years I felt a seriousness in Canada as I feel today. The last time it was October of 1995 when Quebec threatened to leave, and now with the tariffs we see the same issues today. And the reason is that our economy is at stake. If you have been concerned, if you're working for the government, if you're working in the private sector, you would realize what it means when 78% of your exports are heading to one market. What is at stake is our economy. So this is what we realize, that when economic reasoning or economic existence becomes threatened, that becomes an existential threat. With this in mind, I would like you to think about cities. Cities are places of commerce. Cities are essentially labor markets. They are labor market first and everything else later. So with this context, I would like to bring in some points that I would start with and then would have the chance to build on those later. First, cities are places of commerce. Second, transportation is a means to an end, not to an end itself. Its goal is to sustain the economy and the society it supports, nothing more. It supports the economy so that we can have a commerce. Then, what we need to recognize is that while there are many modes, including transit, including bicycle and others, but the reality remains that transit is slow. How slow is transit? Transit is 60% slow, or even more. Actually, if I were to say the same trips that you make by car, if you make by public transit, you take 60% longer. Not my data, Statistics Canada's data. This is the census to 2016, 2021, and more. What it means that if we today move everyone in the city of Toronto from cars to public transit, we slow down the system by 60% or more. That is a reality. Thirdly, we are a suburban nation. 80% of Torontonians, and in fact 80% of every city in Toronto, big city, lives in suburbs. And those suburban commutes cannot be efficiently met by any other mode. They have to be done by public transit, by car, Freudian slip. They cannot be done. If you look around 413, Highway 413, you cannot be served by public transit efficiently. So suburban realities require a transport system that meets those needs. And lastly, if you look at growth, we have been growing, 80% of our growth is in the suburbs. What kind of suburbs? Auto suburbs. So basically, what we have done in the past is that we have created a system that can only be sustained by modes of transportation. And if you look at the demographics of people who are moving here, no one leaves their family, no one leaves their friends to come to Canada so that they can ride a bus. You have the growth demographics that are immigrant-driven, and they like cars. So the future of transportation will remain auto-dependent in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you. Shashank?
Thank you. So I will also start with an economic argument, which is that owning a car costs the average Canadian $16,000 a year. And in times that are tough, that is an amount of money that cannot be sustained and is getting harder with time. And that is just the cost of owning and operating the car for the individual. It doesn't take into account all of the externalities that come with car costs. We are a country facing a massive housing infrastructure deficit. 1 unit of parking in new housing costs on average $100,000. So we're saying, if we go with the motion, that we will continue to pay those costs and they will continue to be borne by society for all time. At the same time, as we have increasingly discovered over the last 30 years, car-oriented communities do not have sufficient tax base to support their basic function and basic infrastructure. And we have, to a certain extent, covered for that by selling more land in a Ponzi scheme where you use future land to pay for existing bad planning decisions. But cities are increasingly realizing that that's not the way to go and are moving away from it and trying to get a more fiscally stable reality. Another thing is we are already not a region of cars. The mode share of car in this region has been dropping consistently for 20 years, as revealed by the most recent 2022 TTS. In Toronto, by 2016, mode share of cars was already under 50%. It rebounded a bit, but is already falling again. So depending on when we talk about the future, if the future is next month, we are already in a region that is not cars, and we are headed even more in that direction. Physics won't allow it. Who thinks that traffic in our region should get worse? If our future is car-oriented, that is where we're heading with. And the pain of becoming more and more car-oriented is something that we have already started to fight against. And we see all of this cumulatively pushing younger people not to drive cars. Younger people are delaying car ownership. And there has been a debate, is that because they care about the environment? Is it because their social reality are changing, or is it because they just can't afford it? And the reality is all of the above, which is already pushing the next generation out of cars. And so, famous story of a family took their kid to the gas station to show you how to pump gas, and the kid said, I'm never gonna need to do that, because that's the future that we're heading with. Also, just because we have done things badly for the last 100 years doesn't mean we need to keep doing them. We have tried and tried and tried to make car automobility work, and we have realized that it doesn't. And so more and more cities and communities are giving up on it and trying to find another way to build better. When it comes to housing, we're already building much denser than we were even 5-6 years ago, again, driven by affordability of construction, but also of automobility. And as more and more cities change and try something new, from dedicated bus lanes, from building more bike lanes, from orienting their urban form so that people can walk more, we're getting better and better examples of other ways to build things. And so a big challenge in the past in North America has been that we only have one example to look for. We don't have any imagination about how the future can be. That is becoming less and less true. And we see that when we do change, it becomes wildly popular.
Great, thank you.
Am I rebutting first? Who's rebutting first?
Would you like to go first with your rebuttal? No, but you need a break. No.
Okay.
So let's look at the numbers. The numbers that she mentioned, Shoshana mentioned, it's very clear. 84% of the households living in Toronto CMA own a car. Only 16% are without a car. And most of them are, and not my word, SOBs. Why? They live south of Bloor. Jane Jacobs came up with this sum, that people who are below south of Bloor are the ones who have no cars or whatnot. The majority of the population is NOBs, north of Bloor. And if you look at the whole city, 84% have at least one car. We are not a place where people are car free. Second thing is that if you look at the growth, I don't agree that the growth has been happening in denser areas. Actually, it's factually not true. 85% of the growth between 2001 and 2021 across Canada, not just in Toronto, happened in auto-dependent neighborhoods. You know why? Because where people can walk and bike are unaffordable places. These are the places that have the highest rent per square foot. These are the places that have the highest cost per square. If you have a doubt, just go out and see, can you buy a semi-detached or a single-detached home in Toronto, south of Bloor? Not at all. You have to go up. You drive till you qualify. And that's the reason why most urban growth in Canada, not just in Toronto, has been happening in auto-dependent neighborhoods. The other thing is that the automobile fleet in Ontario has been rising. It hasn't stopped. This is a myth that the auto sales have gone down. Don't take my word. Go to Statistics Canada and see how the fleet has been increasing. And more so, not my choice, growing with bigger vehicles. These are SUVs and whatnot, and I don't really argue for that, but the automobile fleet is growing. The last thing I would like to say, the millennials are not giving up on cars. I've written about it in multiple times in newspapers. They are slow in getting where other generations got before them. And this is a demographic profile. If you look at the profile, they're not just not buying cars, they're delaying it the way they're delaying having children. It is a demographic shift. The moment millennials will have the same level of children as the generations before them, they will realize that SUV or a minivan is actually is a storage space with wheels on it. Thank you.
Sorry, there's so much to pick on, I don't know where to start. So, one, I didn't say people are moving to denser neighborhoods. I said new neighborhoods are being built denser, which is a different thing. Second of all, you argued my point. Why is it so expensive in walkable and bikeable neighborhoods? It's because that's where people want to live. If it was undesirable, it wouldn't cost more money. But to go back to your original points, you said that transit is 60% slower. That's a Statistics Canada number, but then you applied it to Toronto, which is an inappropriate use of statistics to take the entire country and apply it to the city. Transit is 60% slower if it runs in mixed traffic. When it's done well, bike lanes, bus lanes do not run in mixed traffic, are in fact faster. There was a fun article in the Toronto Star last year of trying to get across King Street, and the fastest way to go was first by bike, then by transit, and only after that by car. To say we are a suburban nation, in fact, many of your arguments are taking the past as predictive of the future. We live in the infrastructure we built. We made a lot of mistakes in choosing to be car-oriented in the past, and now we are living with that legacy. But that doesn't mean we have to do it in the future. Many people would much prefer to live near amenities, and when you ask people how they would prefer to move, they say they would prefer to move by active transport than any other mode. There's a great paper at TRB a couple years ago, if you could teleport, would you do it? And only the people who drove to work were the ones who said they wanted to teleport, because actually people hate commuting by car, but they like commuting the other ways. And then when it talks about millennials, when we finally get old enough, I would point out that I'm a millennial and I'm 40. We're not getting that much older. And unless we're gonna live forever, we're actually just, even if we buy cars later, we will drive less, though there will be less driving in the future because of those delayed transit. And we are never having as many kids as the people before us because we can't afford it, just like we can't afford cars.
Okay, so let's get serious now.
Wait. Steve's
Wait,
turn.
we have to agree. So we're going to do another round of rebuttals? Okay, another round of rebuttals. Good.
It's simple physics. You take the planet, put one person on it, okay? Then you put another one, you densified the planet. I mean, that's no argument that we are building denser neighborhoods. It's just simple. As you add more people in a fixed amount of space, it becomes denser. But where they choose to live is suburbs. People are choosing to live in suburbs. A few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I argued that it's not households that pick a unit or a house, it's the other way around. And if you look at the structure of dwelling units in downtown Toronto neighborhood, they are designed to have people with 1 or 2 persons on average. There's reason why the number of persons per household south of Bloor is much less than the number of persons per household north of Bloor. These are our demographic realities. And if you remember David Foote, who wrote the book Boom, Bust, and Echo, the most well-read, the person who was read the most amongst all the professors that University of Toronto produced in the last 30 years, excluding one, I'm not going to name him. Last name Petster. Okay, so David Foote once said, and it's in his book, he starts by saying 2/3 of everything is explained by demographics. So demographics explain 2/3 of everything. And you realize that the demographics of individuals who choose to live in neighborhoods that are walkable, bikeable, or public transit, they are the neighborhoods that have unique demographics. And those demographics are either singles, couples, or couples with one child. The moment the second child comes in, that's the flight to suburbs. And the fact remains that you pick any neighborhood in Toronto, if you're not living on top of a subway station and your destination is not on top of a subway station, then your average travel time by public transit will be longer than by car. Take it, Toronto, take TTS data, do this experiment, write this paper before I will, that the average travel time by public transit is slower. It's not something ground shaking, it's a fact the way transit is. I'll give you one example. It takes me 5 minutes every day to enter my GO station on the platform and walk to the place where I have to be. That platform, crossing that platform takes 5 minutes. That is the reality. The access and egress times and transfer times with transit, they add up. And therefore, that's the reason why 90% of the vehicle kilometers traveled in Canada and in cities are by car, not by transit.
So before we turn to Shoshana, we're very lucky to have a new feature at the Mobility Network debate. It's called live fact checking. So I'm just going to turn to Eric. What's the truthiness of the two debaters so far?
Oh.
Truthiness? Okay. I don't know who that was pointed at.
When I told Eric that my R square was 90%, he did the same thing.
Okay, Shoshana, last chance, and then I'm going to take it in a couple different directions.
Okay. Again, physics. If you take a person and surround them by a huge chunk of metal, they take up more space than if you don't. And we don't have enough space in our communities for people surrounded by big chunks of metal. And again, it's not that we're adding more people to neighborhoods because people are having more babies. The type of the neighborhoods we are building, even subdivisions, we can talk to Mattamy Homes, people are building many more detached and multi-unit buildings attached to multi-unit buildings than single family homes. The number has dropped precipitously over the last decade. Again, when we're talking about people who live south of Bloor and people who live north of Bloor, I would agree. Much of the change we see is demographics. People like living in their not auto-oriented communities so much that they hold on to them for a really long time. And the people who do have that choice, because we tend to be rich, and so they can stay in their homes for longer. We see so much demand for well-designed communities, not just in Toronto, but in Montreal, Vancouver, Victoria, Hamilton, Edmonton, where people are building more and more other types of living, and those are the places that people most want to live. We can say what things are in the past, and I will say to you all of the points about the past. In the past, Canada has been mostly a place that builds auto-oriented places, and most of us are still living in that reality. But this debate is about the future, about what we will build and what people want. And what people have shown they want repeatedly with their travel behavior choices whenever they have options, with their pocketbook when they have options about where they live and where they move to, is that they prefer to live in areas where they have other choices and are not dependent on their car. Whether or not they own their car, people prefer to leave it at home.
I would just simply say that realize that the cities are labor markets and people move into cities for jobs. And there's no denying the fact that far more jobs are accessible by car than by transit. It's not something I'm making up. I'm going to say that the accessibility by cars is an order of magnitude higher. And that's research by Stephen Farber.
That part's true, and we did some of that work together. I think you saw the same bit. So I can't let you have the final. You got to speak first, so Shoshana gets to speak last.
Okay.
Last rebuttal, Shoshana, and then we'll move on to moderator questions.
How many grocery stores do you need access to do your shopping? I don't need more than a couple. And so accessibility, at a certain point, you meet your needs and you get what you need. The people who have the best accessibility in the city move the least, which is research by Stephen Farber.
The truthiness is really going up. I'm quite pleased with this.
If you
no. We'll come back to you.
More papers from you.
We'll come. Yeah, no other papers are needed. This is fine. Okay. So thank you to both our debaters for their opening salvos. So I thought, I had an idea of where the debate was going, and I wanted to kind of rather than pick on any specific points that you've said so far, you both did a good job of that. I wanted to kind of move it into a couple of other dimensions, other directions that I think contribute to the conversation we're having. So I have questions that are probably, I'll let each of you answer the question, but I think, they're not necessarily balanced. So Murtaza?
Yes, sir.
Not everyone can afford a car, and not everyone is able to drive. So if we continue to prioritize cars as the main mode of mobility, how do we ensure that transportation remains accessible and equitable for all residents?
This is a myth that I grew up reading in books that the low-income households cannot afford to cars. They can have cars. And research across the continent shows that, in fact, low-income households depend more on cars because to live in neighborhoods where public transit is efficient is so out of reach. It's not it's not standalone decision. I'm gonna not own a car. It's a trade-off between housing costs and transportation costs. You draw that indifference curve and you realize that in fact people are not priced out of the mobility markets. They have been priced out of the housing markets, and thank God for the suburbs, because otherwise south of Balor there's no place for it. So you have to plan for cars because you are actually providing low-income households the ability to have jobs. Do you think that people who work at Tim Hortons or work at the Pearson Airport at the 3 a.m. shift are taking public transit there? Absolutely not. It's the car that gets them to a god-awful time so that they can put food on their tables. Mobility and housing, they are tied. And the moment you just plot population density, or mode share by public transit and unaffordable housing markets that have a correlation of 1 in Toronto, correlation of 1 in Montreal, correlation of 1 in Vancouver. Auto-dependent neighborhoods provide the affordability that low-income households live. Don't take my word, just look at the concentration across the city, across the region, and you will get the point.
Can I
Same
rebut
question,
that?
yeah, of course.
They don't have a correlation of 1. I've done that research. We tried to look for if we could see those patterns, and actually we found that low-income households were so evenly dispersed around the city that we couldn't find an identifiable pattern. If you aggregate to TAZs, you'll find the thing you're talking about, but when you do it at TA level, you don't. So one of the reasons that you might have seen that is too much of an aggregation based on thinking too much about cars. It is true that a huge number of people can't afford to drive and don't drive, a number that is getting larger. First of all, our population is getting older. Many, many people can't drive as they age. Younger people are driving much less because they can't afford it, and many people don't own a car. I can't remember the exact statistics, so we might have to go to the audience for this, but many people in Toronto don't own a car at all, and
16% are carless households.
And lots of people at Tim Hortons working at Pearson do take public transit to work there. You should try it. You'll see lots of people wearing their Pearson tags heading to their work on the buses that go there.
$32 per trip is the subsidy, the most subsidized transit.
Yes. And the subsidy per
Coming out of your pocket.
The subsidy per cars is about $1 per kilometer.
No, actually, this is a myth. So Richard Soberman and I...
No, it's not. It's repeatedly
Richard
found
Soberman
in
and I
research.
had this discussion 30 years ago. I will share it with you. And I said, like a graduate student saying, oh, cars are subsidized. He said, wait a second, who told you that? He said, who pays for the cars? 95% of the vehicle kilometers traveled in Toronto.
Who pays for the roads?
95% of the vehicle kilometers traveled in Canada are by cars. And the taxpayers who are driving are paying for the roads. Taxpayers who are driving are paying for the infrastructure. There's no subsidy. If there was someone in Mars, or if Donald Trump was paying for the infrastructure here, you could say it's subsidized. It's not. The taxpayers who are using the facilities, the taxpayers who are driving, they are paying for it. You know how much it's 50 cents on a dollar in operating costs for TTC are by transit users. That is now, when I started in this profession 30 years ago, 85 cents on a dollar were from the fare box revenue for TTC. Now it's down to 50 cents. So where's the subsidy? The subsidy is in transit, not in cars.
That is false. If we're saying that you're a taxpayer when you're driving, but you're not a taxpayer in your transit, we're just living in completely different factual worlds. All subsidies come from the taxpayer of many different kinds, but we have much more subsidy going to oil and gas infrastructure, extraction, distribution, road construction, managing air quality, managing GHG emissions, subsidizing infrastructure provision to the sprawled neighborhoods that come with cars, highways, local roads, suburban roads, healthcare accidents. I could continue. Social cost of the loss of cohesion based on the way and the isolation that comes with driving and car automobile. I could just keep going for a really long time. This research
She basically said, I live in Mississauga and I'm socially isolated. Suburbs are not isolated.
Let me finish my sentence. This research has been done repeatedly on the full cost, both to the user and society, of walking, biking, public transit, and driving. And over again, from Toronto to Vancouver, Europe, the United States, China, we find that the full cost of driving is much, much higher to society than it is to the user, and that we all subsidize drivers much more than we subsidize transit. Now, if you're talking about direct operating subsidy and you're only counting the actual vroom vroom of the car, you are not collectively counting what goes into driving, which is all of the infrastructure, the accidents, and the air quality that go with it.
Absolutely. I agree.
Okay,
So
good.
Great.
Let's stop on that point of
Well, but
agreement.
there's a definition of subsidy that it's poorly defined. It's like induced demand. And we have just perpetrated these wrong ideas into books, and they have to be corrected. Subsidy is if you're not utilizing a service and someone else is, if you're using a service and someone else is paying it. 95% of vehicle kilometers traveled in Canada, in Toronto, are by car, and the same people who are driving.
That's
and,
not
they're
true.
That is true.
No, only about half of travel in Toronto is by car.
This is absolutely. What is Toronto? South of Bloor?
No, I just looked at the TTS data this morning before coming to this debate. It's not 95% of trips are not by car.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying 95% of the vehicle kilometers traveled. You're talking about mode split. I'm not talking about mode split. I'm saying 90% of the vehicle kilometers traveled. That's the thing. If the public transit trip on average is about 5 kilometers long, a car trip is on average, 25 kilometers long?
So
the
we're
kilometers-
rewarding inefficiency in this debate.
No, I'm just simply explaining the reality. And the reality, and you mentioned greenhouse gas emissions. Do you know that during COVID, there were no cars? There was a complete shutdown, right? March 2020, complete shutdown. And people thought the economy has stopped, manufacturing has stopped, cars have stopped. We would have made a big dent in greenhouse gas emissions. It turned out we didn't. Only it went down by 4.5%. And if you compare, if you're serious about greenhouse gas emissions, and I want you not to drive polluting cars, drive Tesla or drive other, Hyundai. Hyundai has, don't drive Tesla, actually I have to take it back. My apologies. Hyundai, Kia, all these East Asian manufacturers have good cars. Look at those. But point is that 14 to 15%, sorry, just one last.
Okay.
14 to 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions globally come from transport sector. So these are the exhaust from tailpipes. And 14% of the greenhouse gas emissions equivalent come from the tailpipe of cows. This is the flatulence of the the livestock that we maintain. Why? So that you can have burgers, that you can have all your meat and steaks. If you're that serious about it and you want people to give up cars, start with giving up steak. That's much easier. One vote.
Wait, hold on. You have to let me rebut this because those numbers are wrong. Let's be factual about it. How many people do you think stayed home during the pandemic? Now, most of us are white-collar workers, but we are by no means the majority. The vast majority of people, including manufacturers, including farm workers, including doctors, including cleaners, the vast majority of people went to work and worked in person.
No, 82% of the people actually,
during the pandemic.
only 20% were at home. In May 2020, this is from the Conference Board of Canada, 40%, 39.5% of Canadians worked from home. And only 18% actually, 39.5% of the people worked from home, 38% worked out, and 20 were out of the labor force. These are statistics in the middle. So we can't argue that these numbers are already published.
I know, but I've seen different numbers. Blue collar workers continue to go to work. If we feel like most people stayed home, it's because most of the people we know work in intellectual economy jobs. They're people like us. Most people kept going to work. If you're a cleaner, if you're a doctor, you went to work. If you work in manufacturing, you went to work. The difference in between what happened in downtown Toronto and what happened at the airport lands is really stark. It was not that people stopped manufacturing or stopped moving. We also kept flying all the planes empty. So the reason you didn't see this reduction in transportation emissions is because actually while our worlds came to a stop, it wasn't what actually happened to most of the world, and there was a huge increase in air quality.
I've
9%.
only done one moderator question, and the moderator promised me at least 5.
Okay.
I am the moderator.
Promised him.
And also we have to stop in like 10 minutes.
Yes, okay. So I will change the topic a little bit now. So this is for Shoshana. So for many, car ownership is more than just transportation. It's tied to identity, notions of freedom, and convenience. And how much of our dependence on cars today is practical and how much is cultural, and what does that say for the future?
So yeah, it's both. There's a whole nature of being car proud, but when we're talking about the future, if we think that today's norms will hold forever, we're being very short-sighted. So for example, I could take you back to the cigarette debate of the late 90s, early 2000s, which had a lot of the same texture and conversation debates. Even the mayor said we should never ban cigarettes, right? We could never imagine that it could possibly change. And now the idea of going to a restaurant or a club and having someone smoke on you is horrifying. So the ability to change norms when it gets to a pain point, as we have reached with cars, given traffic, air quality, road deaths, we are capable of making what seems like very unusual change. And the other thing is, a lot of the freedom of the open road is an advertising slogan. You actually don't get it in practice, right? You've all seen the commercials of like, you drive out of your suburban house and you're immediately in traffic, right? Bicycles and public transit give you the freedom that car promises. And when people discover that, they're really enthusiastic about actually achieving freedom of movement.
Okay, thank you. Taza?
Look,
Let's try to keep them contained.
the difference between us living in a democracy and not living in a Chinese or Soviet-style socialist communist state is that we have the ability to make decisions. Now, not all those decisions are good decisions. I concede that, right? But we simply cannot go to people and say, because I got a PhD in transportation planning, I think you should give up your SUV and get into a bicycle, and you can actually attach something to carry your luggage with it. I mean, these are valid arguments, but the reality is the freedom that we have in this society, that why people come to Canada and not move to Moscow, why people come to immigrate to Australia and not go to China, is because there's freedom here, and that freedom requires people to accommodate the choices they make that we like, and also accommodate the choices that we don't like. If you don't like these freedoms, imagine the car is just one choice. There are so many other choices that you make and the rest of the society celebrates or at least tolerates. So therefore, I don't think people should be defining their worth by their cars, but it's a choice they make, and living in a democracy, I respect their right to have a choice.
Okay. I'll do one more question and then get ready in the audience. Do we have a roaming mic ready? I just wanted to
Yes,
see.
we do.
Okay, so there's a couple, maybe if two people, one on each side of the room, can do the roaming mic. So last question, then I'll turn it back to Murtaza. The GGH is already struggling with tremendous traffic congestion. So if cars do remain the dominant mode of transportation, what can realistically be done to prevent worsening gridlock?
Good. Here is where the true answer lies. There's no way out in the city of Toronto, south of Bloor or south of Steeles, to build more roads. There's no such argument. If anybody thinks that, that's a mistake. So there is potential to still do better transit. And I think to solve gridlock in the south of Bloor, south of Steeles, we still have opportunities to do things better with public transit. There's no way you can have 500,000 jobs in downtown Toronto. That's 500,000 jobs in downtown Toronto. You can't sustain them without the TTC system. The only reason it exists is because those system was designed to bring in 500,000 people. Otherwise, you take transit out and Toronto's downtown disappears tomorrow. I understand that. I appreciate that. But at the same time, growth is not happening in downtown Toronto. There's a reason why Edmonton built more homes last year, 1/4 of the population of Toronto, and Edmonton built more homes last year than Toronto did. We are gridlocked in construction. It takes 36 months to get an approval for a high-rise building in the city of Toronto. Not my numbers. Go to the planners that tell you this way. The reality is, out of gridlock, you have to build the transit system that suits that location. You're south of Bloor, more transit. You're south of Steeles, more buses on exclusive bus lanes. I understand that. North of Steeles is a different territory. And at the same time, those who are in Toronto, who are living and their mobility needs cannot be met by a car, by transit, then you accommodate them. How many times you saw people carrying a child and the child's hockey bag on public transit? I see that every day, because that's every evening I'm in a hockey rink with my sons, and everyone is carrying 1 or 2 hockey bags, because that's the thing, you need a car for that. If I'm without a hockey bag, I take transit every day to work. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Shoshana? So remember, the original question was...
Yeah, what's the future?
If we're already struggling with traffic congestion,
Yeah.
if cars remain the dominant mode, what could realistically be done to prevent worsening gridlock?
There is absolutely nothing we can do to prevent worsening gridlock if cars remain the dominant mode. We will max out. We will come to a steady state where people have reached their tolerance for traffic, and we'll search for other modes and other places to go, which is part of the reason people are moving to Edmonton, because the tolerance for the costs, both monetary and otherwise, of living in this region are becoming really high. So I think Murtaza mostly made the argument for me, right? We need more public transit and more active transport. There's only 3 ways to improve gridlock. 1, congestion charging. 2, major economic collapse. And 3, public transport and active transport. We tried major economic collapse, we didn't love it. We're working on more public transit and more active transport, and it is paying dividends, though not as fast as we might want it to be. And maybe, New York tried congestion charging, and they seem pretty jazzed. But just to factual arguments, right? Let's talk about facts. Have you ever seen a mother with a child in arms and a hockey bag? To be fair, I wasn't looking in the mirror when I did it, but I could see my reflection in the window of the bus and in my cargo bike. And I don't really love being told I don't exist, or that many more people like me do not. It is very possible to live this way. More and more people are choosing. When I first got a cargo bike 10 years ago, I would get stopped with the SOBs to, what is that? Do you have more? And now I'm totally boring. And even up to Eglinton, people think I'm totally boring. I'm farther north. And so already the change is happening. I cede the past to you. You're right about the past. We don't disagree. The question is about the future. And I'm right about the future.
Okay. So, I feel like that was closing.
By the way, do you know the mode
Wait,
split?
no, we're going to make some time for a few questions. So, who wants to get into this fray?
We scared the heck out of people. Eh?
Eric wants to.
We see over here. Could you introduce yourself and then a quick question and then a quick reply, please? So we're running out of time. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Hong Yu. I'm from the Pembina Institute. I guess, there's a lot of statements being made about the nature and the state of public transit that I guess seem to assume that the current status of public transit is set in stone, like it's slower, it takes very long, it's inefficient, it's unreliable. But I mean, these are things that we can change. So I guess my question for both of you is, what do you see the prospects are for improving public transit in Toronto and Ontario in the future to become a viable way to replace cars?
Okay, I think you guys are going to agree on this, maybe. So let's.
Well, let me just say this. There are 3 things to recognize here. Number 1, Edmonton has 15% or less mode share for transit. People are not going there to ride a bus, they're going there to ride a car. Second thing, it is becoming prohibitively expensive for us to build public transit. We are the most expensive. Where's Maddie? Maddie did a talk recently with experts from New York. We are the most expensive place on the planet to build public transit. We have lost all control, due diligence on being able to build $1 billion a kilometer. You'd think cars are expensive? We're spending over $1 billion per kilometer and still we can't finish the projects. That's the reality. How do we do this? I've always been a big favor of buses. I think that if we can learn from places in India and learn from places in Trans-Milano and Curitiba, there's an opportunity for us, or even Ottawa. Ottawa had a perfect bus rapid transit system. They wrecked it, replaced it with trains, and now look at this. There's a mess that they can't contain. Buses running on exclusive right of way have the biggest potential for us in the city of Toronto, south of Steeles, to be able to improve our mobility. We will never be able to get out of congestion. The day you get out of gridlock, realize you're living in a wrong city. Congestion is a sign of economic viability. Detroit solved congestion by going bankrupt. I hope you don't want that.
I mean, mostly what he said would extend it to other places. We're very effectively building BRT north of Steeles, like at the Vaughan Metropolitan Center Station, which I helped design in an earlier career. We can build and invest more in public transit for things that we want to do in the near term. Bus lanes running in their own right of way, giving the streetcars their own right of way, integration with better bike lanes will all work. just because things are hard doesn't mean we're not getting them done. It's been painful, but a huge amount has been achieved in our region in the last 20 years, and we shouldn't discount what has changed. And the Eglinton Crosstown, okay, fair, like we can complain about it, but it will eventually open. We think sometime this year, right? We've built
There's
tens.
a reason Metrolinx didn't come to
Yeah.
the election. That's it, yeah.
We've built the Union Pearson Express, which, it was a big catastrophe, and now it's really popular. I grew up near St. Clair streetcar. I remember people complaining about it for no end and causing a 6-month delay, but now it's a completely integrated part of our public transit with land-oriented development. We can do this, we have do this, we're gonna keep doing it, and that's why this is the version of the future.
Is there anyone from Up Express that can give us the true operating cost? It's $35 per trip. Why don't you tell it to people?
Gauntlet for the Up Express.
Hi, my name is Benita Van Miltenberg. I'm from the city of Guelph. Professor Hayter opened his argument stating that transportation is a means to an end, not an end within itself. And I wonder what you would say to people for whom active transportation, like walking or cycling or using a scooter, is an end within itself. It provides opportunities for physical activity. It provides opportunities for family time, connection with kids on the way to school. It can provide exercise, outdoors time. I'm not sure I have ever heard anyone talk about sitting in traffic as a satisfying way to spend one's time.
We should read Anthony Downs. I'll come to Anthony Downs in a second. Look, I don't know a single motorist who doesn't walk.
A single what?
A single motorist who doesn't walk. That's a myth that people don't walk. Motorists are going to work or to their job, whatever they have to, that's a purpose. But they do walk. They do walk and in the evenings with their children. They do go out. It's not that people who drive cars only open their mouths when they are inside a car. There's much more to people's lives because they have more time. It takes them less time to get to work by car than by public transit. They probably have more time at dinner. But the question is Anthony Downs is probably, I don't know, when I was a student, he was a big name, and I still quote him. He said, if you are stuck in traffic, that's part of your leisure time. You're sitting in the most comfortable seat that you own. It has the most bells and whistles that you can adjust to the contours of your body. It can even heat up or cool down. No other chair in your house does that. You're listening to the music and the best sound system that you can afford. It's in your car. It's part of your leisure. Don't treat it as something bad. You enjoy it. Admit it.
I mean, I think the fact that you had to yell it at people implies that that's not how most people feel. I think there are a very small number of people who really value their time in the car. And I see that. There are people who feel that way. But the vast majority of people...
I don't drive.
I mean, I see the point, not to you and the music. There are lots of people who find it better than some alternatives, but the vast majority of people find being stuck in a car really unpleasant. Even if you have control over your environment, being constrained and unable to move and limited in where you go and unsure what your future is going to be, are you going to get to your kids on time? Are you going to get in stuck in traffic again? I commuted to a job in Mississauga a summer about 20 years ago, and I hated it so much I have structured my entire life since then not to do that again. And that is more indicative of how most people feel about congestion. People hate it. It makes them angry. It spikes their blood pressure. It makes them less healthy. We have a huge amount of data on how much people do not like to be stuck in traffic.
Okay. Last question, and then I'm not going to... Jasvini has to decide. I see okay, how about we hear both of your questions, and then we'll get a response each. So, quick question.
Yep. So, yes. Matthew Sweet, City of Mississauga, active transportation, exposing my bias. At no point, I don't think we really touched on energy costs. Energy costs are going to continue to increase, whether they're paid directly by the user or they're paid through government subsidy or investment, whatever. How does rising energy costs and the drag either on the individual or on society as a whole enter into this analysis?
Good. And we'll hear both questions and then quick answers and then...
I heard you both support BRT and dedicated lanes as important, and Shoshana kind of talked about bike lanes and active transportation. But we're seeing a lot of residents and voters ensuring that cars are the future of mobility. Like the Jane Street bus lane project has been pushed on for years. The councillors don't want it. We're seeing with Bill 212 we're removing bike lanes. So doesn't that show that we're going back to cars?
Okay. Shoshana, why don't you go first on? You can pick and choose your comments here.
Progress goes up and down, right? We're going to sometimes see steps backwards, but the overall trend is moving away from cars and has been for decades already. And some of the things are important about it is much of the opposition towards, for instance, things like bike lanes are people who don't have the option to use bike lanes. Once people have the option, they become really popular. We are really, really bad as humans in stating what our transportation preferences are, which is why we have a whole field about the difference between stated preference and revealed preference. And we find that when given the option, people choose public transit and active transport, especially active transport, much higher than we're able to predict. We're often completely wrong by order of magnitude by how much people are going to use active transport. And that also, once you have active transport, it makes public transport go up. Ultimately, yeah, we could have a couple years where we revert towards investing more in cars, but it just doesn't work. The physics of the cities, the cost will stop us. We can't afford it, and that will push people away from it. I can't remember what Matt Sweet's
About energy.
About energy, which reinforces it, right? Energy is just going to keep getting more expensive. Moving in a big vehicle that weighs, a ton is really energy inefficient, and that's something we're going to have to pay for. So unless you think that the economics of the future are going to be much easier than they are now, we're going to have lots of money to throw around, and it's all going to be really easy to spend lots of money the way we did in the, in the 60s and 50s on moving inefficient vehicles, then it's all going to push us to figuring out other ways to move around just on a pure economic basis.
So let's get some of that money for the research consortium before you leave, but otherwise, yes. Murtaza, you want to respond?
Well, see, the point to understand is that transportation system is a mix of modes. I'm not arguing for cars. I'm arguing for the right mix of modes that meet the needs of people. Our friend from Guelph, the only place where Green Party wins a seat.
There's two places.
In Canada?
Yeah,
or
in Ontario.
No, I'm talking about Canada.
Kitchener.
Kitchener.
There's more than two in Canada.
Sure. Okay, so let me apologize. But the Guelph and Kitchener, university towns, that's what I meant. The point is that people have choices to make. If you choose to walk and bike, that's your choice. That meets the needs of your household. That meets the desires that you have for life. And the point I'm arguing is that we need a transportation system that respects your choices, not imposes a car on you. That's not the argument here. The argument is not to get people out of their sustainable modes of transportation and walking. The argument I'm making is that there are people whose mobility needs will not be served by public transit or walking and biking, especially to employment destinations. For them, let's not make their lives difficult. They already have difficult lives. Let's not make their lives difficult in telling them that we, the transportation planners and their engineers, have decided that you will pay $20 to get to south of Steeles because we are putting a charge there, or we're going to charge Don Valley Parkway. We can do this if the society wants, but you can see that every time congestion gets defeated in a democratic system, the congestion charge, there is a reason for it. The cost of energy, you're absolutely right. But here, I'll tell you something that I learned 40 years ago. Ahmed Zaki Yamani was the oil minister for Saudi Arabia, and he was the head of OPEC. 40 years ago, he said that. He said that the human race got out of the Stone Age, ended not because we ran out of stones. Understand, the Stone Age ended not because we ran out of stones, and the oil age will end, not because we'll run out of oil. We'll have better technologies. I'm hopeful, I'm confident that the engineering and the scientific talent that we have today will be able to show us an oil-free and pollution-free future. I'm very confident about it. I'm just saying right now, don't make lives difficult for your neighbors. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have time for very quick closing remarks. Do you feel like you've got more to close on?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
Murtaza, you open, so you'll do your closing remarks, and then Shoshana will end off.
Okay.
Murtaza.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Got it. Go for it.
Thank you. Shoshana, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you kindly.
You as well.
It's been a delight. Let me just say this. If there were better options available to people, they would take it. And it doesn't mean, as Shoshana said, that we should not create a system or opportunities for people to make the right decisions. No one is arguing this. What I'm arguing is the following, that from 2001 to 2021, 85% of the new households we added in auto-dependent neighborhoods, in the Greater Toronto area, in Vancouver, in Edmonton, even in Montreal. That is a fact. This is a research published routinely by our colleagues at Queen's University. They track where people are living. The growth in Canada, it's not an opinion, the growth in Canada is in auto-dependent neighborhoods. If you want to change something, make development easier south of Bloor. But if we continue to be so difficult to densify, because 36 months to get an approval for an apartment or a condominium building, that's a fact. By the time you get the approval, your pro forma analysis is out of date. It's no longer valid. The economics of the systems have changed. It is also true that we have lost control over building public transit. It's a myth that we will be able to build public transit. There's no outrage that you are paying as taxpayers the most expensive cost to build public transit. It's coming out of your pockets. Until such time that we are able to fix our systems, until such time that we are able to show efficiencies, until such time that people have the option to make the right decisions, let's not be dictatorial about it. Let's facilitate growth. People have the right to earn a living. People have the right to serve food on their dinner tables. And 85% of those who chose Canada, who chose to come to new cities, came to suburbs. And their mobility needs, if you can serve them today by public transit or other modes, let's do this. But that's not the case. The future of Canada is continuing to be suburban. That's a reality. 50 years ago, my last sentence, Harold Spence Sales was the one who founded the first graduate urban planning school at McGill University in 1952. Harold said at that time that suburbs are the cradle of civilization. It took people 70 years to understand what he meant. Suburbs are the cradle of civilization. Suburbs is where the employment and job growth and population growth is, and whether we like it or not, they will continue to be served by automobiles. We don't have a choice yet.
Thank you. So, 1952 is a little before my time, but I would want to point out that, as I said, all of the things you're saying about the past are true. We have built mostly automobile oriented communities in this country and in the United States, and that has been very much to our detriment. And this debate is about what the future will hold. There are many reasons why we are moving away from cars, and the future is not going to be about them nearly as much as the past. And the center won't hold on all of these problems. Cars are creating a social crisis we can't deal with, of loneliness and separation, of community breakdown. They're creating an environmental crisis that we have to move against in terms of emissions and air quality, and electric vehicles don't solve that problem. But they're creating an economic crisis of unaffordability. So unless you think that those crises are somehow magically going away within the future timescale we were talking about, it will not be possible for us to continue to move forward as a community, as a country, with cars with them, or holding us back. And we are already seeing the historic dominance of cars breaking apart in our country. More and more cities are investing in other ways of getting around. We can see with all of the economics you're quoting, people prefer to live in communities where they do not have to be dependent on their car. They may not yet be ready to give up their car, but more and more people are going car light because they want to, but also because they can't afford to do otherwise. I don't actually live south of Bloor as much as we might want to say so, but the reason that south of Bloor is so popular is because you can get a higher quality of life all in. And so people will stretch as much as they can to live there. And it's not just rich people. As I said, the community is much more diverse if you look at the data, not completely aggregated together. Lots of people are living downtown. Yes, I see the past has been a lot about suburban development, but we are a growing country. We have the fastest growth rate in the G7, largely because of immigration. Where those people move in the future is not fixed, and just because they've done so in the past. And we've seen data over and over again. Immigrants predominantly move, number one, where they can get jobs, and you can get jobs in places where you have higher density, and you can afford to go to those jobs in places where you have more public transit. People are hungry for options, they're excited about them, and just because we occasionally see reversions, like with Bill 212, which as far as we can tell is a small number of people calling the premier, the general trend over time is way less car use, way less other things, and it's not just Toronto, it's Edmonton, it's Vancouver, it's Montreal, it's Quebec City. We're seeing these trends across the country and around the world. We already know the way that this is going. The question is to look forward instead of looking backwards.
Okay, thank you to both debaters. All right, so now it's back to the audience for another vote. What's on the screen? Okay, so I think I need to do...
Do you know what the final vote was?
So, not yet. So, okay, so if you're on Mentimeter, you should be able to get your vote in. So we'll give you a few minutes for that. As a reminder, the final tally on the pre-vote was 26 for the motion, 29 against, and 8 undecided. Okay, if you're done voting, put your phone on the table so I can tell if you're done. Are you texting or are you voting? I still see the numbers moving a little bit.
Brian's vote is coming from Hamilton. Hold on.
But he lives south of Bloor. So
I know.
South of Bloor and south of the lake, too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're ready to call it. So the tally after the debate is 26 for the motion, no change, 32 against the motion, plus 3, and 6 undecided. So voting against the motion took the debate. Congrats.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your participation. That was great. And thanks to all of you, the audience, for your questions, for your votes. I'm sure we could have gone even longer with more questions. So next year we'll plan for a 2-hour debate. You guys have the stamina, all right? And please join us now for a drink just through the doors. Thank you.
Thank you very much.